It's 2 a.m. over the Atlantic Ocean. 228 people are asleep. The captain has just left the cockpit to rest. 2 experienced co-pilots are at the controls. The aircraft, one of the most advanced, most reliable passenger jets ever built, is flying itself. Everything is perfect. 4 minutes later, every single person on board will be dead. And for almost 2 years, nobody on Earth will know why. June 1st, 2009, Rio de Janeiro, 7:29 p.m. local time. Air France Flight 447 pushes back from the gate. An Airbus A330, wide-bodied, powerful, the workhorse of long-haul aviation, bound for Paris. 11 hours, across the night, across the Atlantic. Among the 216 passengers, tourists heading home, business travelers, a group of Brazilian Air Force officers, families, an entire cross-section of the world sharing one aircraft, one flight, one ordinary night. The crew, Captain Marc Dubois, experienced, qualified, trusted. 2 first officers, Pierre-Cedric Bonin and David Robert, take the flight deck as the plane climbs out over the South Atlantic. 3 hours in, everything is routine. At 1:35 a.m., the pilots check in with Brazilian air traffic control. They report their position. Controllers respond. Standard exchange. It would be the last anyone heard from them. 8 hours later, Flight 447 does not arrive in Paris. At first, no alarm. Maybe a diversion, a radio problem. Planes sometimes go quiet. Then the hours pass, and then the silence becomes something else entirely. We can only pray and hope. At the moment, we know nothing. Those were the words of France's transport minister when the world finally learned that Air France 447, carrying 228 people, had simply vanished in the night over the South Atlantic. No mayday call, no distress signal, no witnesses, just silence. 5 days later, debris began washing up on the ocean surface, 600 miles off the northeast coast of Brazil. Seats, a child's backpack, boarding passes, 50 bodies. But the plane itself? Gone. Swallowed by an ocean so deep, so vast, so uncharted, that investigators didn't even know where to begin. The black boxes, the flight data recorder, and cockpit voice recorder that would explain everything were somewhere at the bottom of the Atlantic, in water nearly 2.5 miles deep, in a mountain range on the seafloor described by experts as big as the Alps. And for the next 23 months, the world would have no answers. The theories multiplied. A bomb, a structural failure, a lightning strike, a catastrophic software glitch. Some said the plane had flown directly into a storm cell so powerful it tore the aircraft apart mid-air. The families of 228 people buried empty coffins and waited. The search for Air France 447 became one of the most complex, expensive, and agonizing recovery operations in the history of aviation. The initial search zone, 6,500 square miles of open ocean. That's roughly the size of the state of Connecticut, but underwater and in the dark and 2 miles down. 3 separate underwater search operations were launched. All 3 failed. After 2 years, the aviation world was beginning to accept that Flight 447 might never be found, that the truth might stay buried forever. Then, in early 2011, the same team that had once helped find the wreckage of the Titanic, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, was given one final shot. They sent 3 autonomous submarines into the deep. For 11 days, the submarines swept the seafloor, photographing everything. On April 3, 2011, one team member was looking at the images when something caught his eye. Among the volcanic rock and the ancient sediment of the Atlantic floor, there it was. A landing gear, fuselage sections, rows of seats still upright as though waiting for passengers who would never sit in them again. Air France 447 had been found, sitting in 13,000 feet of water on the floor of the ocean, almost exactly where it was supposed to be. 3 weeks later, the black boxes were recovered, and what they contained was almost impossible to believe. The aircraft hadn't been bombed. It hadn't been struck by lightning. There was no structural failure, no catastrophic software error. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder told a story that aviation experts, hardened investigators who had spent careers reconstructing the worst disasters imaginable, described as haunting, as inexplicable, as the kind of thing that keeps pilots awake at night. Here is what happened. At 2:02 a.m., Captain Dubois left the cockpit to rest, standard procedure on a long overnight flight. First Officer Bonin, 32 years old, took the controls. The plane was flying through the Intertropical Convergence Zone, a belt of thunderstorms that stretches across the equatorial Atlantic. This isn't unusual. 12 other flights crossed the same region that same night without incident. At 2:10 a.m., the pitot tubes, small metal probes on the outside of the aircraft that measure airspeed, began to ice over. In the storm clouds, ice crystals had overwhelmed the heating elements. For a period of just 54 seconds, the airspeed readings became unreliable. 54 seconds, not even a minute. The autopilot, detecting the sensor failure, did exactly what it was designed to do. It disengaged and handed control back to the pilots. And that, right there, is where everything unraveled. In the sudden chaos of losing the autopilot, losing the airspeed readings, First Officer Bonin did something that investigators would later call the single most catastrophic decision of the flight. He pulled back on the controls. He raised the nose. The aircraft, which had been flying perfectly level at 35,000 feet, began to climb and climb and climb. The stall warning sounded loud, clear, unmistakable. Stall, stall, stall. It sounded 75 times over the next 4 minutes. But here is the part that defies logic, the part that haunts everyone who has ever studied this case. First Officer Bonin kept pulling back. On the cockpit voice recorder, you can hear the confusion. The two co-pilots are talking over each other, pulling in opposite directions, literally. First Officer Brobert in the left seat was pushing the controls forward, trying to lower the nose, trying to recover. Bonin in the right seat was pulling back. The aircraft's control system averaged their inputs. Neither action was enough. The stall alarm continued to wail. The plane was falling. At 2:11 a.m., First Officer Robert called out, "But I've had the controls this whole time." He didn't know. Bonin hadn't told him he was still pulling back. At 2:13 a.m., Captain Dubois rushed back to the cockpit. He had been asleep for less than 11 minutes. He looked at the instruments. He asked what was happening. Nobody could give him a clear answer. At 2:14 a.m., 4 minutes and 20 seconds after the pitot tubes first iced over, Air France Flight 447 struck the Atlantic Ocean at 152 knots, descending at nearly 11,000 feet per minute. The aircraft was still intact. No fire, no explosion, just an aeroplane, perfectly airworthy, falling straight down, with no one on board who understood what was happening or how to stop it. The impact killed all 228 people instantly. The entire sequence, from the first sensor failure to the crash, had taken less than 4.5 minutes. But here is the part that should make your blood run cold. Airbus, Air France, and the manufacturer of the pitot tubes had known about the icing problem since at least 2008. They had meetings, they wrote reports, they identified the specific model of pitot tube that was most vulnerable. They even had a newer, better model ready to replace them. Air France ordered the upgrades. They started installing them on May 30th, 2009. That's the day before Flight 447 departed Rio. The very first plane to receive the new pitot tubes was retrofitted on May 30th. Flight 447 departed on June 1st. It was next in line. It had not yet been upgraded. For the 228 people on board Air France Flight 447, the margin for life and death was not bad luck, not fate, not weather, not human error alone. It was a known problem, a known solution, and one day's delay in a maintenance schedule. Air France and Airbus were later charged with manslaughter in France. After years of legal proceedings, the charges were ultimately dropped on technical grounds. Nobody went to prison. The families received compensation. The sky received nothing but silence. Your time is the most valuable thing you could have given this story, and I genuinely mean that. If you think it deserved it, hit like. If you want to talk about it, the comments are open. And if you want to be here for the next one, subscribe. No pressure, just stories.